Well, I'm very honoured to be interviewing Noelle McCarthy. She's well known to many of you. So Noelle, you're a super diverse woman.
It's great to be here, May.
And so tell me about your journey, because it's been an interesting one.
Well, my journey to New Zealand began in my early 20s. I was studying in Ireland, in Cork City, and I felt the itch. You know, I'd been in full-time study for a long time, and I wanted to branch out. I wanted to come somewhere else. And New Zealand was about as far away as you could get.
So did you go to Wellington or did you come to Auckland?
I flew directly to Auckland.
Wow, and so you've been here ever since?
And I've been here ever since.
So tell me about Auckland as a cultural place for you to have come. I mean, were you accepted? Did people say, no, you're a foreigner? I mean, we generally feel pretty well disposed towards the Irish, don't we?
That's right, and I think that's really interesting, isn't it, how some migrants have a special historical place or a sort of a cultural place in New Zealanders' hearts. And that was certainly the case for me. I landed smack in the middle of sort of super diverse Auckland in the sense that I worked in hospitality. I worked at a restaurant on Ponsonby Road. It was an America's Cup summer. The place was awash with Prada sailors.
Yeah, sure.
I had a very glamorous experience
Sure.
for the first few months at least.
Yes.
So that was my experience of Auckland, was a place where there were people from all over the world. Literally. And I think apart from, you know, that initial connection which you'll find in shops and pubs and elsewhere, culturally it's been a journey, it's been difficult, and my experience here in Auckland has been increased diversity with fewer of those sort of those tensions and those rough edges.
So tell me, as an outsider looking in, what you see, particularly in Auckland. It's Tamaki Makaurau. It's supposed to be the place desired by many. How have you found it as a home? Has it been quite unique in its experience?
It certainly has. Yeah, I mean, to come from Ireland, the weather's the first thing. You know, being in a city where you can actually live your life outside is amazing for me. Absolutely. And you know, I interview people, so I've spent a bit of time in the last year or so speaking to a range of people who are stakeholders in the changes that have been happening in Auckland. I mean, if I had to think of a way of describing Auckland to someone who didn't know it, I'd talk about growth, and I'd talk about youth, and I'd talk about energy. Because even since the last Rugby World Cup, what was it, 2011, the pace and the rate of the growth we've seen in the city, I think, is palpable. You know, as someone who lives and works, I walk everywhere, so I'm trying to get my driver's license. So, you know, I've seen the city change around me, and interviewing architects or business people or entrepreneurs, people who have that experience of being involved in building a city from the ground up and watching it change. I think, you know, what's been reflected back to me is that that's an extremely powerful thing to be proud of.
Interesting. So do you think that your journey would have been different if you'd been a coloured migrant as opposed to an Anglo-Saxon migrant?
I certainly do. I think, you know, assimilation has been easy for me. That said, I mean,
well, you open your mouth and people say, "Oh,
oh, what a lovely accent!" And
right.
certainly for broadcasting, you know, that's opened doors. I think, you know, I have really fond memories of doing overnight talkback radio and having people who just called me up because they wanted to talk about their Irish relatives or their experiences on the West Coast of the South Island, and wanting to reminisce about it. And you know, I was in my 20s, so perhaps I wasn't aware of the sort of the depth of feeling that went with that, and the depth of love for an imagined place, because some people hadn't even been to Ireland, but that connection was real. And it does make me think now that some time has passed and I'm becoming more aware of diverse communities and of migration. You know, it's a hot button topic, that perhaps we are more welcoming to some migrants than others. And it's about difference, isn't it? It's about having those points of connection or feeling.
Yes, but I think the value in people who come from quite different places like you, because you're not a British migrant, you know, and I mean, my husband's a British migrant, and it's a pretty seamless fit, but I think the Irish culture and history is so different, really, that actually it gives you an outsider's perspective looking in. And the question is, what is the value of that outsider's perspective looking in? What do you see, you know?
Well, when you come from a country that's full of migrants, you know, it's part of our history, it's part of our cultural history to go and to need to assimilate into other cultures. I think you grow up internalizing that, you know, you wanted, so for me, that early experience in my 20s of living here and being homesick, I don't know, there was a sort of resilience. I think migrants need resilience, don't they? You know, in order to settle, in order to fit in, you know. And it's only as I'm a bit older now that I think, gosh, that was quite hard. I don't know if I could do it now. I don't know if I turned up in another country now, would I be able
but you've stayed too. You've stayed, and you've had a great career here, and you're still having a great career here. So New Zealand's ability to accommodate people from very different backgrounds, I mean, clearly that's had to pick up in pace, because as you said, Auckland is now transforming, and it wasn't sort of, it's not been gradual. No. It's sort of been it's been a very steep rise, particularly I think in the last 5 years. Would that be right?
I would agree.
Yeah, I think so.
I think it's generational as well, isn't it? You know, the generation that comes straight after me, millennials, they have such a sophisticated understanding of identity and of what constitutes diversity. I mean, you've done a lot of work in this area. You know, I've read what you've said about this, May. How it's more than simply your nationality or your ethnicity. It's also your sexuality, your religion.
Yeah, it's a combination of things.
Absolutely, and it's complex.
Yeah, it is complex. That's exactly the point. And the question is whether people can cope with that. Because as you know, our whole diversity debate at the moment is just extraordinarily narrow. And I'm not saying let's not have it, but I'm just saying let's have all of it. That's all. Because we're getting more and more complex people. I mean, you know, your partner is a New Zealander, Kiwi born and bred, you know. Your kids will be blah. I mean, my kids are, you know, complex. Yeah. So that the culture that they're creating, it's not really Kiwi, it's not really Irish, it's not really, you know.
And there's such a need for those conversations you're talking about. I think you look at the sort of global political climate. These are important topics, you know, especially given what's happening in the UK, given what's happening in the States.
Yes, yeah, but I guess you could argue what's happening in Britain is kind of really different, or in Europe, just because there were millions of them, whereas we've been rather modest in the number of refugees we'll take, and most of the immigration wave is people we want. I mean, they're high schools, they've got lots of money, they want to invest. So, is it a really different scenario, you think?
Yes, I do. I do think it's different, but I also think it's pressing, because what we're seeing is grievances translated into political concerns as well, you know. And even though, you know, facts are one thing, but how people feel is something else. Again.
So let's talk about that feeling, because part of the reason I wrote the stock take was I was worried about that feeling, and I was worried about that feeling bubbling over. And so when I started seeing it bubbling over through Brexit, and then sort of bubbling over through Trump, although that's complex as well, you know, I thought, wow, okay, so there's been 135,000 downloads of the stock take. There's a feeling there, and people don't want to talk about it, but we need to talk about it, because I'm worried that there's a large number of New Zealanders who have a growing resentment towards what's happening to their country.
Yes.
Do you feel that?
I do, and I think I think it's generational. I think it's very hard to generalise, because it's different for younger New Zealanders, isn't it, who've grown up with a different reality.
That's probably
you know, when I arrived in Auckland in the early 2000s,
oh, you were just a baby.
I was
early 2000s.
Yes.
Wow, okay, so you've been here 15 years or so.
Yeah, I have, and it was a different city when I came.
Really?
Certainly.
Was it quite homogeneous?
Yes, it was.
There would have been Maori and Pacifica, but certainly no Asians.
No, not in the same way. The visibility was different. And you know, I was in a little pocket of Ponsonby, you know, sort of.
And you were fine as long as you kept your mouth shut.
Exactly.
Yeah,
yes,
right.
and smiled and sort of fulfilled perhaps the stereotype of, you know, the happy Irish migrant, you know, who was going to leave again, because that's what a lot of migrants do. You know, they pass through. But certainly the way I've seen the city change, and the way that the languages I hear spoken on Queen Street, the way that the city works now, the impact of migration is everywhere. You know?
So how do we as SUPERdiverse women, as top leaders, lead this debate? Because what we want is we want a smooth, peaceful transition, really.
Yeah.
And but you know, we do need to have a forum for these feelings to express themselves, because I get the feeling that people that born and bred Kiwis think that actually all of the values that they hold dear are being eroded, and yet the message certainly has to be that those of us who came because we were attracted to those values. I mean, Mum and Dad chose to come to New Zealand because they knew that this was a country where women had got the vote first.
And you come because you want to participate. That's certainly my story. You know, as soon as I arrived here, I knew this was a country I wanted to be part of.
Really?
And I wanted to participate in. And
did you know then that you wanted to stay?
I knew pretty soon after arriving here, because why wouldn't you? You know, it was a marvellous place.
It's a nice place.
And a very different experience. And because it was so far away from Ireland, it felt like a part of the planet that could just be mine. You know, it's selfish in that way. But I think that's a very important point about migrants. You know, speaking from my own experience, I wanted to be part of. I didn't want to be separate. I even having an accent sometimes was too much for me. I felt like you know, I didn't want to stand out. I wanted to flatten those vowels and fit in more.
So this is interesting because we've now got 100 SUPERdiverse women leaders, and I mean when you look at their CVs, they're extraordinary, and interviewing them has been extraordinary. And we're going to get them all in a room, and we're going to have a majority, of coloured women in a room, which is extraordinary. So what do you think about this group? What do you think we can achieve?
Oh look, I think it's, as you say, it's having those fora for conversation. You know, that opens the way. I mean, I remember talking to you on the radio last year, and one or two things. What did you say to me? You know, that some people confuse you for Nadia Lim. Just that little comment, and it suddenly thought, what am I doing? Am I lumping people together? It forced me to look at myself. Having those conversations and being able to admit to those, you know, to those, whether you call them deficiencies or areas of, you know, where you'd like to have
but
more
maybe
awareness.
we didn't need to have them before. Maybe it didn't matter because we were all of one sort, really.
Well, we certainly need to have them now.
Yeah, I agree. So this is a forum for having those conversations.
I think so. I mean, that's what I'm looking forward to doing. Also support.
Yes,
you know, to have that support. You know, I think many women's experience, certainly mine, was just finding my way through my 20s and making it up as I went along. And, you know, that's part of the journey and that's part of the excitement. But I do wish that I had been aware of what I could bring to the party, you know, as a migrant, as someone with that unique experience, to be able to say, this is a valuable perspective.
Yeah, no, that's great. Okay, so I think that's the second key point. Because the thing is that most of us are trying to pretend we're not. Like people say, oh, were you born here? And you know, there's a part of me that thinks, no, actually I wasn't born here, and that's of value.
And this is my story, and this is what happened, and perhaps you can relate to it, or perhaps the specifics of it, yours will be different, but there's a commonality.
So I really wanted you in the group because actually SUPERdiverse Women is not about colour, it's about the fact that we weren't born here, and therefore we have an outsider's perspective, and there's value in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because we're more likely to challenge the status quo.
And the norms.
Well, my challenge was simply because people have said, oh, why are you setting up this group? You know, there's lots of women's groups. Well, that's not the point. The point is that our journey is really very different. You know,
and that's to be celebrated too. And you know what? It goes back the other way as well. When I go back to Europe and in this climate of Brexit and you know what's happening with some of the far right groups in France, for example, being able to go back and saying I'm part of a country where plurality
is valued.
I think that gives New Zealand the opportunity to really lead.
I agree. So we should lead, and we should focus on being. Actually, it's interesting because we spent our whole lives trying to become insiders.
That's
actually. Right. and all of a sudden, it's occurred to me that there's an enormous value of being an outsider, actually. And that therefore you've done things, like you've done series and you've asked questions. I love you as a broadcaster because you're an outsider. So you ask some really interesting questions.
But people let outsiders get away with things too.
Yeah, oh well, yes, I guess so. I mean, every now and then I say, oh yes, but you've got to remember that English is my second language.
Maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the other thing is too that it's helpful for us to be there for other women who are coming through, because I'm sure in your 20s and certainly throughout my my growing up years, I just thought I was the only person who ever felt these things. I felt very lonely.
It's a lonely feeling, isn't it? And you know, I also think I can learn so much because, as I said to you, in terms of those generational differences, there is a generation directly beneath me who has such a sophisticated understanding of identity. You know, more sophisticated than mine.
True.
And identity politics, and identity politics are taking such a high placing on the agenda at the moment. You know, for better or for worse. You can debate whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's a conversation that needs.
I think it's a necessary thing.
That's right.
And it's partly because people presume things. So, you know, they'll presume things about you, they'll certainly presume things about me. The stereotype for Irish women, gosh, I don't know what that is, but I sure know what a stereotype of a Chinese woman is. Yeah. And let me tell you, I don't fulfill any of it, apart from the fact that I don't drive that car properly.
Two of us can be an Irish one too.
Oh, yes.
But there's a cost to that, isn't there? I mean, there is a cost to having stereotypes, and for businesses, for the law, in so many different areas.
Yeah.
I know that's what a lot of your work is.
Absolutely right. Yeah, well, there is a cost. And the cost is that law, business, everybody is getting further and further away from the real lived experiences of people like you and I. And we are now, you know, comprising an increasing part of the population. I mean, in terms of the talent pool, 56% are migrants and their New Zealand born children. In terms of those born overseas, in Auckland, 45% born overseas, it's almost half. In terms of Māori Pacifica and Asian women, 50%, not women, sorry, Asian Pacifica and Maori. But you know, a quarter of them are coloured women, and actually it's going to be a third soon, because we're going to end up with 1 in 3 Asians. And I have to say that actually this is something that other people don't realise. I'm astounded by it. I walk around and think, wow, okay, they're all Asians here. It's interesting.
Yes.
You know? And I notice it, and I think about it, and I think about what that means for us as a country. Yeah. Do you think we talk about it enough? We don't, do we?
No, we don't.
Yeah.
Oh, and that's one of the reasons why I'm really glad to be a part of this.
Sure.
Because I want a space to be able to talk about it.
Sure.
It's certainly something that I think, you know, we're heading into an election next year. Yeah. All of this is important. It's important not just politically, but socially, culturally, artistically.
Yes.
You know, in terms of food, everything.
No, that's right. I fear that next year is going to be incredibly. Not the right conversation.
And that's why it's really important, I think, to talk about how best to frame these debates.
Well, I think you frame these debates in terms of our shared common interest, and our shared common interest is to live in a great country, isn't it?
That's right.
That, you know, I want us to remain number 4 on the peace index. I don't want us to have race relations and tensions, and I don't want to be in a country where, you know, my children are subject to discrimination. Yeah, and so we have a shared interest in that respect. Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you.